President Trump may be preparing to end an Obama-era policy that protects the children of undocumented immigrants from deportation. The policy is called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA for short. Attorneys general from 10 states are suing the White House to end the program. Reports this week suggested the president could begin undoing the program as soon as Friday. But at Thursday's press briefing, aides rejected that timeline.
You confirm reports that the president is leaning towards or deciding to end DACA, and what are the ramifications of that for the Dreamers?
Final decision on that front has not been made, and when it is, we will certainly inform everybody in this room. Cecilia.
Thanks. In January, the president said that Dreamers shouldn't be worried. So can you stand here today and say Dreamers should not be worried? Once
again, when we have a final decision, this is under review. There are a lot of components that need to be looked at, and once a decision is made, we will certainly let you guys know. I'm not going to get ahead of something and be presumptuous when a decision hasn't been made. We don't know when the final review is going to be completed, so it would be disingenuous for me to create a false timeline that simply just isn't workable.
Is not, you guys aren't even
there are a lot of conversations around the timeline and when that has to be made, and again, that hasn't been fully reviewed and vetted and decided.
In February, the president said he would treat Dreamers with heart. Does the president stand by his statement to treat Dreamers with heart?
Absolutely. The president stands by his statement. Right now, this is currently under review, both from a legal standpoint primarily, and until that review is complete, again, as I answered before, we don't have anything to add further.
Let's bring in Ed O'Keefe. He's a CBS News contributor and congressional reporter for The Washington Post. All right, so Ed, we heard Sarah Huckabee Sanders asked about the president pledged to treat Dreamers with, quote, heart. But he also ran for president as a hardliner on immigration. So what kind of position is he in now?
Looks like he's headed towards doing away this program. Whether he does it immediately or phases it out in some way, I think is what really is the sticking point at this point. Look, tomorrow is a Friday of Labor Day weekend. There's been a presumption here in Washington among people who, may not be directly involved in the decision, but are familiar with how the White House has been thinking about this, that believe that tomorrow may be the day that the official announcement is made. Just because Sarah Huckabee Sanders says it's not going to happen doesn't mean it won't happen. She's been proven wrong by her boss before. There has to be something announced or signaled by the 5th, which of course is next week. So if not Friday, then probably Monday or Tuesday. And all presumptions are that the program will wind down. The question at that point will be, what exactly did the president opt to do, and what kind of a political problem did he potentially create, in addition to all the other challenging things that Washington faces? This one is fraught with real emotional firepower and is a tricky one for a good cross-section of the Republican caucus up on Capitol Hill. A lot of Republicans represent districts with growing immigrant populations or predominantly Latino populations that are going to be immediately affected by this. I know personally colleagues in journalism who are grappling with the possibility they may lose their job if they lose their immigration status, and are going to have to really consider whether or not they are able to remain employed and remain in the country. It's that stark for some people, and you drop that into a debate that includes the hurricane funding, the need to raise the date limit, and so many other things. And it just shows you how challenging September is going to be for Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in a piece out Thursday, your Washington Post colleague David Nakamura reminds us that DACA was intended as a temporary executive order from President Obama because Congress wouldn't pass immigration reform.
Right.
Has Congress's appetite, Ed, for immigration reform changed at all since then?
Not really, although there was some interesting developments this afternoon. Mike Kaufman, who represents part of Denver and is a Republican in a district that is predominantly, or increasingly minority, made clear that he, if the president revokes DACA, will introduce legislation and essentially try to force Republican leaders to hold a vote on it, knowing that just about every Democrat in the House would be with him on that, and knowing also that there are probably about 6 or 7 Republicans, including Kaufman, who would support legislation that essentially puts in place protections for these kids who are specifically protected by DACA. That may mean that this could be forced onto the floor for a vote and put a lot of Republicans on the spot. Will they be willing to defy their president, who probably labels this an unconstitutional power grab by the previous administration, or do they stand in defense of their constituents who would be put at risk? It's called the Bridge Act, the legislation that Kaufman says he'd force to a vote. In the Senate, it's co-sponsored by Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin, a Republican and Democrat there, South Carolina and Illinois. They believe they have bipartisan support in the Senate. So they're right there it could be something that comes up pretty quickly if there's enough support. But again, where it fits in with all the other things that have to be done in the next few weeks remains unclear. And I think, if anything, the silver lining in this, should the president do it, is that he may finally compel Congress and force an immigration debate that is long overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that has really bedeviled previous presidents and previous Congresses as well. Let's talk about the Russia investigation. The Wall Street Journal says that the president's attorneys have been making arguments against the obstruction of justice probe to special counsel Robert Mueller. Now, the paper also says that such contact is a normal tactic for legal defense. What does the congressional investigation, Ed, look like when lawmakers return from recess next week?
You know, funny you should mention that, because I spoke with two members of the Senate Intelligence Committee today who said that it's ongoing. Hundreds of people have been interviewed, thousands of documents have been generated, and they still believe that they're on course to potentially wrap things up by the end of the year. Although they acknowledge that if it continues and if it's still so comprehensive that they need to continue, they will. That said, both of them, and one was a Democrat, one was a Republican, made clear that the Mueller investigation is the lead vehicle for all of this now. And that is to be seen sort of as the one that really might potentially take things to the next level. That said, the Intelligence Committee investigation is expected to also unearth some information that everyone would want to see. And of course, remember, next week, Donald Trump Jr. is expected to meet with the Senate Judiciary Committee, another committee, to discuss things behind closed doors, sworn testimony, but secret, not public. They are also looking into wrongdoing and looking more specifically at the FBI. The Intelligence Committee, of course, remember, is looking at all things related to Russia's intrusion into our election. And of course, Mueller is handling the potentially criminal wrongdoing of various actors.
On another topic, Ed, Defense Secretary James Mattis held an impromptu press availability at the Pentagon Thursday and downplayed suggestions that he and the president are at odds. Now, reporters asked about comments from Mattis and President Trump that appeared contradictory. President Trump tweeted Wednesday about North Korea that, quote, talking is not the answer. Soon after, Mattis told reporters, quote, we're never out of diplomatic solutions. So why do you think it was so important for Mattis to dispute the appearance of a rift?
That's a good question. I think it's really tricky to be James Mattis and Rex Tillerson right now here in Washington. Both of them have said things publicly in the last few days that put them at odds with the boss. But the fact that Mattis went to talk to reporters today and clarify that, you know, he's serving his country, he feels he has a patriotic duty to do so, and that there isn't that much daylight between him and the president, I think is notable, because he understood very quickly there he had to make clear that there isn't some wider rift between him and the president. Remember, this is a guy who was a former general and had a very good relationship with the Pentagon press corps. I think he understood that he could walk in and talk to them today and they would understand where he's coming from, and just sort of make clear that he's not going anywhere, but that he understands that to say that there are diplomatic options is probably necessary, frankly, because so much of Asia right now is on pins and needles watching this situation with North Korea.
Absolutely. All right, Ed O'Keefe in Washington for us. Ed, thanks a lot.
Take care, Elaine.